Chapter 2. Got ink? The next day, Hunter rode his motorcycle to the bikers' clubhouse. Meditating on the pretext of his intervention, he was open to any sign that it wasn't meant to be. Instead, green traffic lights and empty roads endorsed him, ushering him to his task. He drove his bike down a long dirt driveway, passing by numerous no trespassing signs with colourful language warning others to keep out. As he approached the house, 2 men on the porch stood up from their chairs, confirming that he was in the right place. Pulling up to the front, he parked beside the 15 other bikes in the yard. The sentries rested their hands on their guns, while another man exited the house cradling a sawed-off shotgun. Hunter greeted them with a smile and waved at the 3 men. Most people became distressed with the introduction of firearms, but Hunter didn't react, which confused them. A 4th man's face appeared behind the screen door. Seeing Hunter's clerical collar, he yelled into the house,
"Jack, that priest guy's here!"
Satisfied, the sentries returned to their rocking chairs and watched Hunter extract umbrella from his bike.
What a fag.
Jack opened the screen door and motioned for Hunter to follow him into the house. Hunter was overwhelmed by the odour of stale cigar smoke and gasoline as he entered the dimly lit living room where 2 other bikers were seated. One man stood up, bracing Hunter against the wall to search him for weapons or recording devices. The seated man noticed that Hunter had tattoos on his arms.
You got ink. You do time before?
The 3 men stared at Hunter with curiosity.
You could say that.
Frustrated by Hunter's vagueness, Jack pushed him for specifics.
Show me. Pull up your sleeves.
With the umbrella still in hand, Hunter obliged him and pulled up his right sleeve and then the left. The word rage was on his right forearm and the word ruin was on his left. Balancing a saliva-soaked cigar on the corner of his chicken-greased lips, Jack scowled at the ridiculousness of Hunter's tattoos.
Rage and ruin? You're no church boy. You belong to a club or something?
Nodding his head, Hunter replied,
I used to.
Jack smirked.
Which one?
The 75th.
Sneering, Jack retorted.
Sounds like a faggoty group to me.
The other men laughed.
They all carry umbrellas and drive foreign bikes like you?
Hunter confidently responded.
It's a 51 Moto Guzzi. They don't leak oil like the panheads.
Jack crossed his arms and rolled his eyes as a judge overruling an attorney.
Well, it ain't a fucking Harley.
They led Hunter into the living room, which resembled a junkyard more than a habitable living space. Several bike motors hovered on engine stands above the oil-stained carpet. Tool chests, beer bottles, and food containers were the only highlights of colour in the room. One would expect to see bugs, but the petroleum-saturated materials repelled even the hardiest pests. The carpet beneath the oil-stained recliners was worn through by foot traffic, and the only item that was out of place was the cocaine-dusted trustee plaque that Jack had taken from the church. Jack sat on the edge of his junkyard throne, moved a plate of chicken bones aside, and wiped the chicken grease from his hands onto his jeans. The biker that frisked Hunter returned to his seat on the couch beside Jack. Still standing, Hunter pulled an envelope from his jacket, dropping it on the table before him. Jack picked up an empty beer bottle to make room for the document, throwing it toward a metal garbage can in the corner of the room. The bottle shattered on the rim of the can, peppering glass against the wall behind it. Smiling, Jack turned his attention back to the envelope.
That was quick.
He proceeded to open the envelope but realized that it was empty. The smile faded from his face, and he became irate.
What is this? It's empty. What is this?
Jack looked up at Hunter, waiting for his explanation.
This is the end.
Hunter opened the palm of his hand, allowing the top half of the umbrella he was carrying to fall to the ground. The men focused on the umbrella's canopy as it fell to the ground, unaware of the 3-foot katana it exposed. Without warning, Hunter squatted eye level with the men and swung the sword in a semicircle, slicing the lackeys' throats. The blade's arc continued unabated before striking a steel rivet on the lapel of Jack's jean jacket, directing the blade upward, cutting into the side of Jack's skull. Instinctively, Jack kicked his feet against the coffee table, knocking Hunter's feet out from under him, causing him to fall forward. Falling on the table mid-chest, Hunter struggled to gain a handhold to stand from his vulnerable position. Jack rocked back and forth, frantically trying to stand, but obesity and the broken springs in the recliner prevented it. Managing to place his hand on the table, Hunter righted himself with his weapon in hand. Jack rose from his chair, displaying a 6-inch Bowie knife in his right hand. He allowed his cigar to drop from his mouth as he taunted Hunter.
Come on, motherfucker!
Jack knew he had to close the distance to make Hunter's swordplay useless. Even if Hunter managed to hit him again, he'd be unable to escape Jack's pig sticker. Hunter teethed on close-quarter combat, willingly backing into the confined space as Jack advanced. Jack rushed him, intending to body-slam Hunter against the wall to disarm him and fill him with holes. Quickly raising his blade, Hunter pressed the hilt against the wall as Jack's body slammed him against the wall. Hunter took the full force of Jack's body weight, which pinned him against the wall. Unable to move, he braced for the impact of Jack's knife. But Jack didn't move. He had impaled himself on the katana, piercing his heart and killing him instantly. Hunter pushed him away, and Jack collapsed to the floor. His impact had pinned the katana into the shiplap wall by its tsuba and rattled the double-hung windows, alarming the men seated on the porch. Once seated next to Jack, the two lackeys slowly crawled away from Hunter, clutching their neck wounds. Hunter directed his attention to the sentries on the porch as they ran past the windows and headed for the front door. Hunter moved to the side of the living room entryway, preparing to receive them unarmed, while his katana mocked his negligence. The first biker entered the room, saw Jack lying motionless on the floor, and went for his gun.
What the fuck?
The second man entered behind his partner and was subdued. Hunter grabbed him by the neck with his left hand, controlling the man's gun hand with his right. The first man turned around and raised his gun at him. Hunter forced his captor to fire his weapon point-blank into his partner's face. The captive man cursed him.
You fucker!
Hunter pushed the man's gun arm to the ground as the biker struggled to pull it upward with every fibre of his being. Hunter quickly reversed the direction he was pushing and moved in unison with the man's effort. He directed the gun underneath the man's chin and pulled the trigger. Scanning the room, Hunter saw it was clear and recovered his katana from the wall. He followed the blood trail of the wounded men, finding them huddled together beside the refrigerator. They passed out from blood loss during the fight, still clinging to the oily rags they used to slow their bleeding. Unlike the living room, the kitchen was surprisingly clean. The makeshift drug lab was filled with glassware, measuring instruments and small plastic bags. A powdery layer of cocaine residue covered the kitchen island, filling the cracks in the Formica countertop. Hunter moved past an open walk-in pantry and into the study makeshift sleeping area, pausing momentarily to listen to his surroundings. A choir of cicadas serenaded the recently departed, but there were no other sounds. Satisfied that the first floor was clear, Hunter slowly scaled the stairs to the second floor, walking on the outer edges of each step to avoid creaks made by aged wood. He paused at the halfway point to allow his senses to scout ahead, and still he heard nothing. Continuing up the stairs, he stopped at eye level with the second-floor landing to scan the bottom gaps of the 3 doors for movement. Anyone hiding behind the door would obstruct the light from reaching the door's threshold, creating a shadow. He remained there motionless, waiting for the other person to move if they existed. Even though he didn't hear anything, his gut instinct issued pause. Hunter sat there for roughly 10 minutes when he heard the impact of body weight land on bed springs and the distinct sound that shotgun shells make when they tap against one another in their box. The paint-chipped door handle turned slowly, and double barrels protruded from the small opening of the door. The hallway was dark, but Hunter could see that it was Bob, the one who had harassed Cien. Bob ventured out of the room and crested the stair railing with his shotgun. He saw Hunter and jumped back, carelessly firing both barrels at him. The deer slugs missed Hunter, hitting the wall a foot above his head. Hunter fired back, intentionally hitting Bob in the stomach. Dropping his shotgun, Bob fell into a seated position against the wall and began moaning in pain as he yelled at Hunter.
You fucker!
Bob grabbed at his stomach, assessing his wounds as Hunter rose from the stairs. Bob looked up at Hunter and recognized him from the church.
You're dead. You're all dead.
Unmoved, Hunter responded.
Can you tell how worried I am by the expression on my face?
Bob struggled through his pain to escalate his threat.
You sure as hell will be.
Pulling up his shirt, Bob looked down at his stomach and moaned before passing out from the pain. Hunter searched the other rooms but didn't find anyone else. Entering Bob's room, he discovered a bed with shackles and handcuffs on the corners of each bedpost. The sheets looked like they'd never been washed, sharing the same nicotine-coloured yellow tint of Bob's teeth. Polaroids of women restrained and most likely sexually abused covered the wall behind the bed, one of whom appeared to be a minor. Hunter pulled the photo from the wall and pressed his foot against Bob's stomach. The pain summoned Bob back to consciousness, and Hunter pushed the picture against Bob's forehead before it fell into his lap. Hunter raised his voice in condemnation.
Who is this?
Looking at the photo framed by his blood, Bob smiled.
Oh, you found my sweets. It's not what you think, though. They loved it. They all did.
Bob's tone conveyed that he believed this on some level. Angered, Hunter scorned him.
No, they thought they were going to die.
Looking up, Bob grinned and continued.
I'm going to take all of them down and put Red's picture up by itself. Make her my number one.
Shock dissociated Bob from his dire situation as he openly expressed his plan to his enemy. In a moment of clarity, Bob questioned Hunter.
Who are you?
I'm 13, just like you, Bob.
What? What do you mean?
Hunter, grabbing a patch on Bob's leather vest, shook it.
This, the 13 patch you posers have on your jackets. I'm judge and jury just like you.
Shit, man, I'm not afraid of you.
Bob resounded.
You're nothing.
Raising the gun, Hunter pointed it at Bob's crotch. Bob's bravado quickly drained from him like the blood from his gut.
Wait!
Bob defensively held up one of his hands to block the gun as he yelled.
There's some type of cult or something.
Hunter lowered the weapon.
Listen, you're not walking out of this unless you give me the name of the person who contacted you losers.
I think the guy's name was Fad or something like that. He works for a company called Thema or something. It's on the card Jack gave you.
There were 15 bikes, minus the 5 men Hunter had dispatched, plus Bob. This led to the possibility that 9 other bikers were unaccounted for, and Hunter pressed Bob for the answer.
Where is the rest of your crew, Bob?
Bob appeared confused by the question. Hunter clarified.
Your buddies? I counted 15 bikes outside.
Slowly shaking his head, Bob responded,
There are only 6 of us. The other bikes are donors. We just use them for parts.
Hunter stood up, walked downstairs and into the living room. He stepped over Jack's body to pick up the plaque the bikers had taken from the church. Hunter noticed that Jack's recliner was smouldering from the cigar Jack dropped during their fight. He walked outside, sat on his bike, and waited for the show to begin. It took several minutes for Jack's recliner to ignite, but the house went up like a bonfire. Hunter sat there watching the house succumb to the flames. Satisfied that no one had escaped the house, he drove away, dropping a few of Bob's Polaroids along the dirt driveway. He analysed the op for the tactical errors that he had made. Despite his success, things could have gone very badly. He had all of them on the defence before Jack stole the initiative from him. Hunter owned his mistakes and moved on. The number of bikes troubled him while he considered the merit of Bob's words. Anyone protecting their brothers would lie even when facing death, so Hunter had to accept the possibility that 9 other bikers remained. If they did, they would return to the church to get their pound of flesh. As much as Hunter wished to avoid it, he would need to sit on the church for a few days to see if anyone raised their head. He headed home while running through tactical scenarios for a 1 versus 9 fight, focusing on preventing collateral damage. It would have to be another psychological operation, one of deception. Patrick sat down to read his newspaper the following morning and read an article about the bikers' house fire. The fire had been determined to be accidental. Still, Patrick found the timing of the incident to be too coincidental, primarily due to the fact that none of the men survived. As he laid the paper down, he noticed that the plaque the bikers had taken was back in its place as if it hadn't moved. He removed it from the wall to inspect it and saw the sticker of the awards shop where it was framed. Perplexed, Patrick placed it back on the wall as a vehicle pulled into the church parking lot. He looked outside to see a familiar blue and white Ford pickup. The driver blocked 2/3 of the front bench seat, while his passenger could barely see over the dashboard. Smiling, Patrick walked outside to receive his guests.
Good morning.
A short 60-year-old Japanese man wearing dress pants, a dress shirt and a sweater emerged from the truck and returned his smile.
Morning, Patrick.
The driver's door opened, and the truck rose 6 inches as the driver exited the vehicle. The man stood 6.5 feet tall, was in his 50s, very muscular, and had a short haircut. He looked sophisticated, resembling someone from GQ magazine. Smiling widely, Patrick took hold of the Japanese man's arm to escort him into the church and chuckled.
I don't know why, but I always think of the folk character John Henry every time I see Bridge. Isn't that funny?
The Atlas smiled, greeting Patrick in his native tongue.
Bonjour, Patrick.
Good morning, Bridge.
The 3 men entered the church and sat at the conference table. Minutes later, Sian pulled up driving her 1966 Pontiac GTO, a car a parishioner had given her when he became too old to drive. She didn't know the car's value or iconic stature until strangers pressed her to sell it. Despite the astronomical offers, she'd never part with her banger she had named Old Biddy. Entering the church, Sian greeted the men and entered the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Patrick placed a document on the table and flipped through the pages.
Maz, these are the forms we must fill out to remove the other trustees.
Patrick opened the document to the signature page and handed it to Maz. Reviewing the paperwork, Maz appeared confused.
But your name is still on it, Patrick.
Patrick tilted his head side to side as he looked down at his signature on the document.
I know.
Concerned, Maz looked directly at him.
I understand, my friend, but I don't think that would be wise. These incidents will only increase in boldness and frequency. However, we can still accomplish our mission without unnecessarily placing anyone's safety at risk. How would that serve Sian or your congregation?
Meditating on Maz's words, Patrick nodded.
You're right, Maz. I was just being stubborn.
He pulled out his pen, lined through his name, and initialed the document. Smiling, Maz patted Patrick's hand.
Good, I'm glad that's over. Now there's no reason for the vultures to harass you or any other trustee. They'll have to deal with me.
Maz could see that the notion worried Patrick.
Don't be troubled, Patrick. This isn't my burden alone. I have John Henry here.
They both looked at Bridge and laughed. Maz continued with a psalm of wisdom to Patrick.
The Lord works out everything to its proper end, even the wicked for a day of disaster.
Comforted by Maz's words, Patrick continued.
I spoke to Sian about her moving, and we both agree that it would be a good idea if she stayed with you for the next few months, at least until we are beyond all of this.
Maz smiled at Patrick and Sian.
Certainly, we'd love to have her. The house needs someone to lighten it up, and we can certainly use her help.
Sian entered the room carrying breakfast plates and placed them on the table before the men. She continued to make several trips from the kitchen, delivering toast and coffee before joining them.
So, Hana, it appears that we are going to be roommates.
Hana was Maz's nickname for Sian, which meant flower in Japanese. Smiling widely, Sian looked at Maz.
Yes, we are. I just hate to leave Patrick here on his own.
I know, we just want to be safe. I don't want your uncle to abandon his calling and do something rash for their vulgarity and insults.
Sian grinned at her uncle.
That man had a face like a bulldog chewing a wasp.
The men laughed at her colourful characterisation of Bob.
I know you're not supposed to call people fools, Patrick, but God's all right with calling them Egypts.
They laughed again as Sian was in rare form following the biker's visit. Bridge was the first to finish his meal and stood up to collect the empty plates. Sian jumped to her feet to assert prideful ownership of the task.
No, I'll get them, Bridge.
No, ma'am.
Bridge returned to the table to collect more plates, and Cien helped him. He took a position in front of the sink to prevent Cien from accessing it, and began washing the dishes.
This is my kitchen, and I don't care how big you are.
Bridge looked up as if he heard something, looked around and returned to washing the dishes. He spoke softly, in a conversation only for Cien's ear.
Patrick, do you have mice? I think I just heard a little mouse.
Cien hit him in his side, scowling at him, which Bridge couldn't see.
And mosquitoes. I think one just bit me.
He chuckled. Something outside the church caught Patrick's eye, and he leaned to his side to look over Mas's shoulder. Mas turned around to see several motorcycles heading in their direction as the sound of their exhaust pipes clamoured behind them like iron war drums. Patrick grew anxious while Mas focused on counting their numbers like a child's game.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
The riders pulled up to the front of the church one by one, just as they had done the previous day. Patrick stood up and stared out the window in disbelief. He had just read the newspaper article about the fire and the group's demise, yet here they were again. Parking their bikes, the men filed into the church as Mas stood up to receive them.
Can I help you?
Patrick had witnessed the group's blatant disrespect the previous day, but it was something new for Mas and it annoyed him. Mas and Patrick knew who they needed to address as one stared at Patrick with hate-filled eyes. The man barked at them.
Sit down.
Mas and Patrick sat down as the man took a chair across from the man.
I came to pick up the title, is that it?
The biker pointed to the document Mas and Patrick had just signed. Patrick instinctively placed his hands over the papers and pulled them towards his chest. Irritated by Patrick's reaction, the man leaned over the table with an outreached hand.
I'll take those, Father.
Patrick reluctantly released his grip on the documents as the man took them. The biker laid the papers on the table and began taking photos of each page with his cell phone before sending them to an unknown recipient. When he was done, the man leaned back in his chair and appeared to be waiting for a response. Mas and Patrick looked at one another in puzzlement as the group sat in a strange silence. 5 minutes later, the biker's phone rang. The man answered his phone and flipped through the document, reading along with whoever was on the other end of the call.
The last page, okay, I'll call you back.
He ended his conversation and glared at Patrick, pointing to Maz's signature.
What's this? All of the trustees signed their rolls over to Mas Kaido? Who the fuck is Mas Kaido?
Mas pointed to the plaque on the wall and smiled pridefully.
That's me. I'm Father Cato.
The man was confused that the tiny Asian man sitting before him was the one to whom everyone had delegated their roles. He squinted his eyes at the plaque and then looked back at Mas. The biker took a deep breath and softened his tone.
Listen, fellas, I usually never mix business with pleasure. But you are priests, so I can be open with you. I am exhausted. I am fucking exhausted. I'm coming off a 3-day coke bender, prostitute binge, and not feeling my best. I'm anxious, agitated, and restless. My brother, Jack, asked me to pick up the title from you, or take the redhead as collateral until you produce it. So here I am. The title isn't ready, and you thought removing trustees would protect them from harm. What makes it worse is that someone murdered my brother and burnt down our house the day after they visited you. I wouldn't put the two events together before, but...
Patrick interrupted the man.
I'm sorry to hear that, son, but you can't believe we had anything to do with that.
Angered by Patrick's statement, the man pointed to the wall behind them, as his brother did the previous day.
Well, can you tell me how the fuck that plaque on the wall got there when it was sitting on my coffee table yesterday morning?
Mas glanced at the wall behind them, trying to determine what the biker was referring to. The reappearance of the plaque was also a mystery to Patrick, but he understood the man's implications. It didn't look good. Thinking quickly, he lied to dissolve the situation.
We have a few of those plaques.
Standing up, the man walked over to the plaque and studied it for any distinct details to link it to the one he'd seen at his house. Satisfied, he returned to his seat and motioned for his partner to search the church for other people. The lackey rounded the corner and came face to face with Bridge. The biker was stunned by his brute size and the danger he posed. Sensing his fear, Bridge raised his open hands to the man.
Relax, friend. I'm unarmed.
The lackey backed up slowly as everyone turned in his direction to determine the cause of his concern. Bridge entered the conference room, startling the others. The leader's mouth fell open in astonishment.
Whoa, you're a big son of a bitch, aren't you? Holy shit.
The leader pointed to a chair beside Maz.
Here, join us and have a seat. Shit, have 2 chairs.
Bridge walked over to the table and sat down beside Maz. The group's leader looked Bridge over briefly before turning back at Patrick.
So, where's the girl, father?
My niece? She's not here today, not that it matters.
Shame.
The man raised a gun and began tapping the barrel against his lip.
What to do? What to do?
Scanning his captive audience, the biker considered his best path to success. He was lost in thought when he saw the reflection of blue lights appear on a picture frame just above Patrick's head. 2 lackeys leaned against the window to see a white van with a flashing blue light on the dash pull up beside their bikes.
It's cops!
The leader looked at Bridge suspiciously.
Did you call the fucking cops?
Patrick shook his head no and tried to de-escalate the situation by responding passively.
No, there's no reason to. We're just talking.
Well, answer the door, father. Just don't do anything stupid.
Patrick walked up to the front door the bikers had left ajar and began speaking to a police officer. The group couldn't hear the entire conversation, but Patrick's responses were a series of yes, sir declarations. Patrick stepped back from the doorway as a police officer in full tactical gear entered the room, turning down his radio. The officer's polished badge was the only detail on the man's raid gear, not subdued.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Officer Bishop, and I am part of a U.S. Marshal task force. We are searching for 2 fugitives seen in the area and are conducting a sweep of the neighborhood to locate them.
The biker's leader responded to him scathingly.
We are in the middle of a business meeting here, man, and we aren't the ones you're looking for, so...
The officer interrupted him.
I apologize for the inconvenience, but I'm afraid I will still need to see all of your identification.
This statement upset the leader, and he raised his voice.
Listen, Bishop, we don't have time for this. Do you know Detective Reese or Sergeant Neville? Tran Neville? Tell them you are detaining Trent Foster. They can identify who we are without your harassing us.
Bishop nodded.
Reese and Neville are out here with us also. We're assisting the U.S. Marshals with the search. They have the lead.
Fuck.
The police officer's interruption angered the biker, now known as Trent Foster. Trent knew he had to comply with the police, but wouldn't make it easy. Continuing, the officer explained,
This should only take 20 to 30 minutes. We appreciate your cooperation.
Bishop turned his radio back up as he tuned into a message from his dispatch, promptly answering back.
Negative dispatch. 10:27 for a 10:29.
Turning his radio back down, the officer addressed the group.
There are 2 other officers next door. They'll be here soon to expedite the process. Again, I apologize for the inconvenience.
Bishop pulled out a pad of paper and a pen from his pocket.
I can perform the necessary checks outside one at a time so you can continue your meeting if you'd like.
In a prideful demonstration of disobedience, Trent belittled the officer's tasking.
Sure, whatever gets us through this bullshit the quickest.
The officer pointed to the lackey closest to him and asked him to follow him outside, while Trent continued to lambast the police.
They don't just harass you, they blast those fucking radios everywhere they go. Like they're saying, fuck you, deal with it. Fucking losers. So, where were we, Father?
Patrick and Maz had no intention of cooperating with the group's demands, and Patrick wove a tale to buy them more time.
The title must be transferred to the executive trustee, Father Kaito. Otherwise, they'd all be required to be present to sign the document. 2 trustees are out of town and won't return until next week.
Trent was somewhat satisfied by Patrick's response, but his hangover pushed him to find a swift resolution.
When will it be done?
We have a 2:30 p.m. appointment today to finalize it, and that's the earliest we can do it.
Pointing to Bridge with suspicion, Trent asked,
What's he here for, then?
Maz smiled, looking at Bridge.
He's my nursing assistant and driver.
Does he change your clothes for you when you shit yourself? Bathe you?
Maz nodded while grinning at Trent. Visualizing the act in his head, Trent verbalized his disgust.
Yeah, fuck all of that.
The officer returned to the conference room and motioned for the next biker to follow him outside. Trent looked concerned.
Where's Dave?
My partner just showed up, so this should expedite the process.
The radio chatter began again, and Bishop responded to the call.
10-4.
Bishop addressed Trent directly.
Dispatch reported that Sergeant Neville will be here shortly to assist us.
Reassured by the news, Trent smiled,
Cool.
believing that things would go smoothly moving forward. The second lackey followed Bishop outside to the parking lot. Trent shook his head.
I'm not going to sit here all day waiting for it. I guess I could leave a guy here to collect it.
That would be fine.
Suspicious of Patrick's resignation, he questioned his compliance.
You don't seem very upset by the arrangement, Father. My brother said you were full of piss and vinegar when he visited you.
Patrick shook his head and smiled at Trent.
No, we are quite happy with the price they offered us, especially due to the age of this place.
Trent looked around to assess the condition of the church. He saw the cracked, peeling paint on the ceiling while considering the age of the building.
Yeah, maybe.
Officer Bishop returned with his radio blaring. Trent rolled his eyes and sat fixated on the ceiling, waiting for the background checks to be completed, when he considered the possibility that some of his guys might have outstanding warrants. Trent knew that Sergeant Neville would make that all go away. Still, he wanted to speak to him directly to ensure that happened before another officer discovered it.
Officer, I'll go next. I want to speak to Sergeant Neville when he gets here.
Yes, sir. We're almost done.
Bishop led Trent out of the church while Trent grumbled about the inconvenience.
This is taking up a lot of my fucking time. Were there any problems with any of my guys?
No, sir.
Trent walked out to the parking lot, where his flunkies were seated, and then noticed that their wrists and ankles were zip-tied and that their mouths were covered by duct tape.
What the fuck?
Trent scanned the parking lot looking for Sergeant Neville, just as Bishop placed a stun gun against his neck and pulled the trigger. Trent fell face first onto the asphalt, embedding pieces of gravel in his face. Bishop secured his hands and ankles and returned to the church. Trent struggled to regain the function of his hands as drool ran from the corner of his mouth. He turned his head to scan the parking lot for other officers, only seeing the white van. Nearsighted, he squinted at the van markings, only to read the letters U and H, before realizing the true gravity of their situation. It read, U-Haul. Returning to the conference room, Bishop motioned for the last two men to join him.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're all done here. Sergeant Neville confirmed your identity. You're free to go.
The lackeys snickered as they exited the room, believing they were beyond restraint. Patrick, Maz, and Bridge watched as Bishop led them toward the entrance, and they became alarmed when he lunged forward to shoot one of the bikers in the neck with his taser. Instinctively, Bridge jumped out of his chair, readying himself for whatever might happen next. The second biker went for Bishop's weapon, which the officer easily deflected. Patrick yelled,
"Oh my goodness!"
The officer subdued the man and stood up to catch his breath while holstering his weapon. Maz and Patrick's age prevented them from moving quickly, and they slowly rose to their feet. They were confused by the officer's excessive use of force and assumed the bikers must have been the fugitives the police were looking for. Perhaps excessive force might have been necessary when dealing with violent offenders. Walking over to the conference table, Bishop sat in the chair Trent had been seated in only moments earlier. He took off his sunglasses and wiped the sweat from his face. Bishop looked at Patrick and calmly asked him a favour.
Can I trouble you for a glass of water, Father?
Still dumbfounded by what had just occurred, it took Patrick a moment for the request to sink in.
Water. Yes, of course.
Bishop realised that the men were still standing.
Please, have a seat.
Bridge and Maz sat back in their seats as Patrick returned with a glass of water from the kitchen. Bishop drank the water in one sip and set the empty glass on the table.
Thank you, Father.
Bishop looked familiar to Patrick, and he struggled to place how he knew him.
Son, do I know you?
Bishop wiped the hair out of his face as Patrick grabbed the table.
Hunter, what are you doing here?
Hunter smiled, mindful of Bridge and Maz's presence. Recognizing his hesitancy, Patrick reassured him.
This is Bridge and Maz, their family. This is Hunter. He attends our survivors group on Wednesdays.
Smiling, Maz extended his hand to him.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Hunter.
Patrick shook his head.
I'm grateful for your help, son, but concerned that you got involved in this mess. They are dangerous men, and we gathered here today to discuss their threats.
I'm sorry, Father. I wouldn't have gotten involved, but I couldn't let it go when they threatened you and the others.
Patrick felt indebted to him.
It's probably the noblest thing that I've ever seen. I didn't know that you were in the force.
Hunter smiled, laughing.
I'm not. I dealt with many of those types when I was in the military, and the only way you can communicate with people like that is through the same brutality they dispense on others.
Laughing heartedly, Bridge spoke in French.
Bien fait. Quel spectacle.
Hunter didn't know what he said, but ascertained that he approved. Bridge translated it for him.
Well done. It was a great show.
Patrick and Maz were confused that Bridge had made any sense of it. They reflected on Bridge's words, and the masquerade finally became clear. Maz smiled at Hunter.
You're quite the illusionist, aren't you?
Patrick was very curious about the fire and the bikers who died.
Son, I haven't stopped thinking about the bikers' house fire. Do you know anything about that? Maybe I shouldn't ask. No, I'm sorry, you don't need to answer that.
Hunter responded.
I didn't cause any fire, but let's just say that whatever happened to those men was for the betterment of society. You only saw a glimpse of their depravity. You're a shepherd tending to your flock, and I'm a sheepdog who watches the herd. I don't have a choice but to act when wolves raise their heads. None of it is personal, except for that Bob character. We had a conflict of interest.
Patrick raised his brow in curiosity.
What do you mean?
I initially came here to attend the survivors group, but returned to build the courage to ask Sienne out for coffee. I saw her first.
Hunter smiled widely, and the men laughed heartedly.
I apologize, gentlemen. I need to wrap this up.
Bridge stood up from his chair and shook Hunter's hand.
Do you need help with anything?
No, I don't want to involve any of you in this, but you could move the bikes to the back of the church if you don't mind. I'll come back for them later.
Bridge nodded, smiling.
No problem.
Patrick looked at the bikers through the window, concerned about their welfare.
So what does their future hold?
I'm going to have a come-to-Jesus conversation with them and give them a choice.
Patrick nodded, unsure of what that meant. Hunter put his sunglasses on and pointed to the document on the table.
You might want to put that in a safe place, Father.
Hunter walked out of the church, loaded his passengers into the U-Haul, and the three men watched as he drove away. Bridge smiled at Patrick and Maz.
I like him.
The men were too distracted to notice that Sienne had joined them. She walked into their view and stared out the window with the others.
I like him too, Sam, and the answer is yes.
Maz and Bridge laughed while Patrick was still sorting out the ramifications of whether Hunter was a hero or cut from the same cloth as the bikers. They lived in desperate times, and the answer to that question existed on a razor's edge. Patrick had taken a man's life when he was younger, and it would be justifiable under legal, societal, or biblical scrutiny. Despite the man's wickedness, Patrick still lived with the burden of taking his life. It was the reason he chose a life of servitude. He reflected on Hunter's statement and agreed, God needs his sheepdogs too. We each serve the Lord in different ways. One thing was sure, Sienne and the others saw him as a hero. Bridge turned to the others.
I already know what alias to give him. We should call him Guile.
Copyright C 2022 by Killer Ravens Publishing LLC. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods, or by any information storage and retrieval system without the prior written permission of the publisher, except in the case of very brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. Disclaimer. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, business, events, and incidents are the products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The opinions expressed are those of the characters and should not be confused with the author's views.